Have you ever had that feeling of going on social media and feeling like, compared to you, everyone else is doing something way more interesting? They say comparison really makes for a happy man, but sometimes it can be hard to ignore what everyone else is doing. And sometimes it just feels like no matter how much I care about something, there's already somebody out there that knows more about it, spends more time on it, and is doing it way better than I can. A common piece of advice is to just be yourself, but as far as vague advice goes, that's pretty up there, especially in a world where we increasingly get to choose who we want to be. And I always just used to think that it's our interests that make us interesting. But when I look at my own interests, it seems like there are a lot of people out there that have already kind of taken it for themselves. Fitness and motivation, already covered. Cars and driving, don't even worry about it. Artistic design, keep moving, buddy. Songs about Kermit?
Kermit is my boyfriend. Kermit is a frog. Kermit is a little green amphibian. Kermit's living in the swamp. Kermit's in space, he's an astronaut. Sweet like honey, Kermit with a hat.
Actually, you can keep that one. But this all makes me wonder, what about the rest of us? Are we just all doomed to be uninteresting? Are we just all doomed to be boring? Luckily, it's not that bad, and in fact, there's actually a lot of really interesting research around what makes people more interesting and more original, which leads us to 4 useful tips for living a life that's less boring and more fun. Now, the first tip shouldn't come as much of a surprise, but I was surprised behind the strong science about it, and that is, of course, having a hobby. Now, turns out, and stay with me here, apparently it's really hard to do interesting things when you don't really do much of anything. Surprising stuff, I know, but despite the obvious downsides of not having hobbies, what's even more surprising is the potential upside. In his book, Originals, the psychologist Adam Grant talks about how Nobel Prize winners are between 2 and 22 times more likely to have hobbies compared to the average scientist. Having a hobby, turns out, isn't just about filling your time. It's a key ingredient for a more interesting life. When we engage in activities outside of our regular routines, it gives our brains a chance to consider things from a new perspective and to try out new ideas, which could lead to some pretty surprising situations. But actually, on that topic of new ideas, let's move over to the second point on how to be more original, which is, of course, stealing. Theft, burglary, a grand heist, whatever you want to call it, originality is out there for the taking. Inspiration is meant to be stolen. You just gotta go find it, and you don't even necessarily need a balaclava to do it, though that would be pretty cool. In his little black book, Steal Like an Artist, the author Austin Kleon opens with the following statement: nothing is original. He argues that almost everything has been done in one way or another, and so a lot of the times what we think of as originality is instead just finding a new way to kind of interpret an already existing idea, or to take seemingly unrelated things and tie them together in a new way. Essentially, stealing inspiration from things that already exist. A good example of this is the iPhone. When it debuted in 2007, it wasn't actually the world's first smartphone, but it borrowed ideas and technology from various sources and packaged them in a way that was original and that revolutionized the industry. Apple combined already existing features to create a whole new user experience, which made it truly interesting. To bring this idea back to a more practical level, one way to be more original is to take seemingly unrelated things in your day-to-day life and to mix them together to see how they interact. A good example of this comes from my friend Dr. Shivani, who is a dentist that picked up crochet as a hobby with some pretty cool results. Not only did it further improve her fine motor skills, but it also gave her an opportunity to craft gifts for her pediatric patients, thereby adding more meaning to both her work and her hobby. Plus, I think it's just pretty safe to say that the idea of a crocheting dentist definitely fits the bill of original, and it just came from taking things that on the surface look unrelated, but then bringing them together and just kind of seeing what happens. The third point would be going out and doing things that you don't know how to do at all, or as I kind of like to refer to it, staying curious. In his book Range, the author David Epstein talked about research that compared generalists, i.e. jacks of all trades, to specialists, i.e. masters of one. The research aimed to identify which kind of skill set would lead to the most innovation. But what they found was that not only could neither one beat the other, but they both ended up falling short to a third kind of skill set, that of the polymaths. People who could do at least one thing really well, with a broad and deep understanding of a number of other skills. So whenever we try new stuff, it's common to run into one of two realizations. The first realization is that, oh, I'm not very good at this thing because I have no idea what I'm doing, and so it's usually pretty hard to feel cool when you're trying out something new for the first time. But the second realization is that there are often a lot of things that we don't even know that we don't know when we try to get into something new. For example, a few years ago, as I was just getting into videography, I also decided to start picking up skateboarding after watching some videos from the filmmaker Jake Frew. At first, I could barely even stand on a board without falling over, so that didn't exactly make me feel like much of a daredevil. But on top of that, as I was trying to learn more about skateboarding online, I quickly realized there were a lot of things that I never even thought about. However, despite having no idea what I was doing, I decided to spend a little bit of time on it every single day. And a few weeks later, I kind of set this goal for myself to go on a skateboarding trip with some of my other friends that were already into skateboarding, and to try and turn that experience into a short film, as a way of kind of motivating me to continue to work on the skill of skateboarding while also, just taking on a bigger project, because I had never taken on something like a short film before. So it was basically just a way for me to try and mix my interests and to see what happens. So, basically what I was talking about in point 2. Now, when the time came, neither my skating nor my videography was particularly great, but the trip did happen, the short film got produced, and to this day I look back on it as a very interesting and original period in my life. But that feeling only comes from going out and trying new stuff. So if you can get over that initial discomfort of feeling a bit stupid and not really knowing what you're doing, then further down the line you'll find yourself in really interesting situations purely just by virtue of you going out and having the willingness to try stuff. And so, with all that being said, to kind of wrap things up with the fourth and final piece of advice, I would say the best way to be more original is to just be yourself. I know I said earlier that it's very vague and not very practical advice, but recently I came across a continuation of that saying, which I found really helpful, which is basically, what is ordinary to you is extraordinary to someone else. One of the big problems with social media is that a lot of it seems very perfect because it's also very curated, and we tend to only really see the best aspects of someone else's life, and we take a little bit of that, assume that that is a representation of everything, and then we compare ourselves to that. Yes, there will always be people that are better at a certain thing than you are, or who share an interest with you, but they have made that interest more their thing than you have made it yours. But that doesn't leave you being boring or uninteresting, because at the end of the day, you are still you. No one else has the same mix of quirks and experiences and interests that you do. And so what I find to be a very original move is to take things that you care about and then to mix your own personality into that. There's a friend of mine, Geneva, who is an oral hygiene student that also makes dental vlogs on Instagram. Now, she's definitely not the first person to make dental school content, but she applies her own personality to everything that she does, which leads to something that is inherently unique. I think she is a perfect representation of someone who is becoming a little bit more original, every single day because she makes time for the stuff that she cares about. She finds ways to mix her interests, and she's not afraid to try new stuff, all while kind of injecting her own personality into everything that she does. And when you take all of these concepts and you string them together in your life like that, it's very hard to come out on the other side not being at least a little bit interesting. So I guess to just wrap things up, the path to originality involves nurturing your hobbies, stealing inspiration from various sources, exploring new and unfamiliar ideas, and most importantly, just being authentically yourself. Thank you very much for watching, and with that being said, go out there and make it matter.